7 minutes ago, Putin fled from Moscow. This is what the Kremlin feared the most. The dictator knocked on Erdogan's door and is begging for salvation. The stakes are high. Russia is gifting Ukraine 3 of its regions. Total shock. Rutte has outsmarted Trump. Weapons for the AFU are moving in columns. The head of the White House still hasn't understood anything. NATO is leading the way. In parallel, Japan has gone to war with the Russian Federation. Sharp retribution for Kyiv. Tokyo has bared its swords and is bringing samurais into Ukraine. What a piece of news! Budanov is personally strangling the Kremlin. An African noose the dictator cannot take a breath. Has it really begun? Ukrainian ballistics have pronounced a sentence on Russia. Our most powerful missiles have taken the enemy's sky under their control. The time for retribution has come. All this in our episode, Hellish Point. Everyone is talking about this. Moscow has turned into a desert. Putin fled to Valdai and locked himself behind 7 locks. Air defense, or rather its remains, are on every corner. This looks like a serious failure. Putin is falling at Erdogan's feet. This is his last chance for salvation. He is ready to go to any lengths, and even gives Ukraine 3 of his regions at once. The borderland is being cut off on command. The dictator is ready to pay the highest price. A turn of events that no one believed in. The beginning of a mutiny. Russians are openly striking at Putin. And that's not all. The first details, next. Putin in a ring of air defense. In March 2026, 7 new towers with pantsers were built around Putin's residence in Valdai. The total number of air defense systems around the Russian dictator's Valdai residence reached 27. This was reported by the Russian service of Radio Liberty.
As satellite images from Planet.com show, the construction of 7 new towers for pantsers began on the same day, March 17th. Some of them are already equipped with anti-aircraft missile systems.
The publication writes that, just like the Pantsir towers around Moscow, the air defense systems in Valdai are located around Putin's residence in 2 rings of large and small diameter. But experts are certain that the effectiveness of these pantsers raises questions.
What the Pantsirs one is, the United Arab Emirates learned from their own bitter experience, having purchased more than 50 from the Russian Federation, expecting it to be an effective means of combating aerodynamic, that is drones, aerodynamic means of destruction. And now the United Arab Emirates are calculating the losses resulting from strikes by Iranian drones. And they are speeding in the direction of the Russian Federation quite tellingly and eloquently. It turned out that the vaunted Panzer S-1s, they turned out to be absolutely ineffective in the moment of countering drones.
And here, Russia's problems might arise not from drones, but from missiles.
Moreover, let's focus on the number of cruise and ballistic missiles of Ukrainian production. And this is where the Russians will have big problems. And the problems with air defense are, first and foremost, the Russian side's appeal to the Turkish side with a request to sell them their own Russian S-400s, which were once sold by the Russian Federation for $3.5 billion and which accordingly became, well, a serious stumbling block between Turkey and the United States. In other words, the capabilities of Russian air defense are limited.
At the end of December 2025, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov stated that Ukraine allegedly attacked Putin's state residence in Valdai with drones.
Russia has the right to determine for itself, when it comes to its national interests, what exactly constitutes a threat to its security and what does not.
Well, and then Russia threatened a response.
Such reckless actions will not go unanswered. The targets for retaliatory strikes and the timing of their execution by the Russian armed forces have been determined.
However, the Russian side has been unable to provide any convincing evidence that would testify to an attack.
There was, of course, no night, day, or morning massive attack specifically on Putin's residence. What Putin is doing now was a dirty game. It's an insinuation. He and Lavrov are trying to do everything possible to disrupt the negotiations, the quite successful ones, between the presidents of the US and Ukraine, Trump and Zelensky. It's clear that nothing would be left of this residence. Everything there should have burned down. But according to what our sources report, there wasn't a single hit, not a single drone, UAV, missile, bomb, or anything else on any residential building. What they are doing now is a genuine information psychological special operation.
Journalists began collecting information about the location of towers with panzers near Putin's residence as early as the end of 2024. In July 2025, satellite images showed that there were at least 7 panzers. And already in August 2025, 12 towers and elevated positions were discovered around the residence in Valdai for placing panzers, 1 air defense systems on them. For comparison, in Moscow and the Moscow region, whose population is over 20 million people, journalists counted 60 air defense positions, which is only 5 times more than the number installed in Valdai.
Putin's paranoia has long been a byword. That is, he really takes his own security very seriously. He is very worried about any threats that might cause him any harm. Overall, this is Putin's standard behavioral pattern. In any confusing situation, he goes into hiding. He hides in his secret residences, receiving guests there only after numerous security checks.
By all appearances, Putin is indeed afraid. After all, Alina Kabeva spends a lot of time at the Valdai residence with Putin's sons. And for the Russian president himself, they built an exact replica of his Kremlin office there.
His paranoia has become especially evident after Prigozhin's failed mutiny, and it's clear that the actions of the Ukrainian armed forces don't add to Putin's optimism either, so he's particularly focused on protecting his own residences, trying to safeguard himself this way.
But that's not all. Moreover, Putin has begun purging the authorities in several regions due to the threat of a revolt. The Kremlin is preparing to replace the heads of 3 key Russian regions ahead of the upcoming elections in September 2026. The heads of regions bordering Ukraine have also come under fire. This is reported by the Institute for the Study of War, citing sources within the Russian government. As noted by 3 sources close to the Russian presidential administration, the authorities are discussing replacing Gladkov, Bogomaz, and Melikov. The Belgorod and Bryansk regions border Ukraine.
It's obvious that after Prigozhin's mutiny, the threat of some kind of uprising within the elites is very much worrying Putin. Since then, Putin has clearly become very paranoid toward other members of the power vertical. And these constant reshuffles in power, the arrests in the Ministry of Defense, the dismissals, and the attempts to somehow remove certain generals. The replacements among governors, all these constant shuffles of the power vertical, indicate that Putin feels a lack of trust in his own power elite.
The main goal of these personnel rotations is to save the ratings of Putin and the United Russia Party. The Kremlin fears that public discontent in border areas due to constant shelling and danger could lead to protest voting, and work against the dictator himself.
Putin is indeed very worried about his own safety, constantly seeing conspiracies everywhere. That is, Putin understands perfectly well that he will never lose power in any election. But he could very well lose it as a result of another coup, and he's probably very afraid of that, and it's likely the main thing on his mind.
Shock, Rutte has tamed Trump. The NATO Secretary General found the golden key to the White House. A secret plan to save Ukraine that could change everything. You won't believe what's happening behind closed doors. The official forced Trump to play by his rules. Sensational details that were hidden, watch next. Forced to be cunning. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte found a special approach to Trump to help Ukrainians' political rights.
The picture is generally fine, but we must also soberly understand that the longer the Russian-Ukrainian war lasts, the more significant negative consequences it may have, both for our country itself. And if we talk about the foreign policy factor,
recently, media reported that NATO members are outraged by Rutte's approving reaction to Donald Trump's decision. However, not everything is as clear-cut as it seems. In fact, the Secretary General is allegedly appeasing Trump so that he doesn't abandon Ukraine, which is at war with Russia.
it demonstrates what the political realities are now in the United States of America itself. And unfortunately, this is indeed a challenge for us. A challenge for Ukraine that such an important strategic partner has changed the situation in terms of supporting our country and not for the better. Because of which Ukraine is now forced to look for alternatives, and in particular, President Zelensky's European tour, which is quite literally happening right now as we speak, it is also precisely connected with the fact that Ukraine is asking for more help from European partners.
Support for Ukraine in such circles is especially valuable, considering the statements from the United States.
One of the things I'm most proud of as an administration representative is what we told Europe. If you want to buy weapons, buy them. But the United States is no longer buying or sending weapons to Ukraine. We have stepped out of this process.
Europe really supports Ukraine as much as it can.
It seems to me that, in fact, we need to prepare for an even more difficult situation, given that perhaps even America, even on a commercial basis, will not be able to fulfill its obligations, especially if the conflict in the Middle East continues. The spending of United States resources on this military operation, of course, could significantly affect the supply of weapons to Ukraine.
Meanwhile, the American president is doing everything possible to crash his rating, which in April 2026 reached an all-time low.
During the Cold War, the main aspect was not only this issue of economic cooperation or even an economic protectorate of the United States over various European states that did not fall under the influence of the Soviet Union, but it was also a clear and compelling demonstration of the greatness and enduring spirit of America itself at that time. And after World War II, the United States indeed became a global hegemon, which, let's say, could dictate the terms of world politics. And now, if this does not happen, then in this way, the United States of America could gradually slide backwards.
Actually, Trump is indirectly helping Ukraine with his actions. Elections to the United States House of Representatives are scheduled for November 3, 2026. Given the negative growth of Trump's support, and consequently his teams, a new team with diametrically opposite views could appear in the American Parliament.
Urgent weapons for the armed forces of Ukraine from Japan, a new reality. The samurai have bared their swords, and all for the sake of Ukraine. Tokyo is lending a hand and preparing a real technological revolution. All to increase the pressure on Putin. Takaichi's patience has run out. Japan is entering the open game and is making claims to the Kremlin regarding the Kuril Islands. The ally is no longer in the shadows, but a confident and influential player on Ukraine's side. The taboo is lifted on command. Be the first to know.
Glad to see you. Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you. Good to see you. Nice to see you.
Cooperation between Ukraine and Japan is reaching a new level. The traditionally neutral country is today betting on militarization, and without official Kyiv, Tokyo simply cannot manage. Everything changed last year with the arrival of the new Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi. It continued in February 2026 with her party's victory in the parliamentary elections, and is growing right now, which is why interest in Ukraine is increasing.
Japan is interested in Ukrainian approaches to using drones, not only maritime but also aerial ones. To a lesser extent, this concerns production technologies, and to a greater extent, specifically tactics and integration with other means of warfare.
At the same time, Ukraine is willing to share this experience. Meetings are repeatedly held at the state level, the last of which ended with the allocation of a new aid package to us worth $6 billion. Mainly, these are investments in our economy as well as non-lethal weaponry, such as transport for the military, bulletproof vests, helmets, and medicine. However, speaking of defense, one should not exclude air defense systems, namely missiles for Patriot systems.
The only country that has a license for their production outside the borders of the United States is Japan. Why? Because Japan had a corresponding agreement there. And effectively, Japan is a manufacturer, effectively an American US plant on Japanese territory.
Patriots fit perfectly into today's Japanese doctrine of not transferring weapons that can be used to destroy enemy manpower or equipment. However, this rule, it seems, will soon be broken. After all, in Japan, the population already openly supports the country's militarization against the backdrop of threats from China and the Russian Federation. And it seems the understanding has come that the status of being eternally neutral is not a salvation.
Japan built 2 aircraft carriers, bought F-35 aircraft from the Americans, and missiles for these aircraft. Then the Americans pretended that, yes, it's just a destroyer with a flight deck that can fit 20 aircraft on one of the ships. Japan managed to buy 400 missiles from the Americans, Tomahawk having signed the contract in time in 2023. An exceptionally peaceful and friendly country that has long-range capabilities.
At the same time, the first attempts to reach the international level of support for Ukraine, specifically with weapons, have already been made. In the near future, Tokyo is preparing to announce its joining of the EPRO initiative for the purchase of weapons for Kyiv. Also, experts do not rule out the direct transfer of weapons accumulated in warehouses.
For example, M270 MLRS systems, self-propelled Italian FH-70 howitzers, the Type 87 anti-aircraft gun, which looks suspiciously like the German Gepard. In addition, the Japanese have their own original school of tank building, and tanks in modern wars still remain relevant.
Also, Japan is obviously becoming a strong ally of Europe in the matter of equipment production. And given that Ukraine is today a flagship in drone assembly, obviously Tokyo could also help here with technologies.
Now Europe is developing a 6th generation fighter, not even 5th anymore, already 6th. So Japan is taking part in it. Because when it comes to military electronics, Japan is 3rd to 5th in the world.
It is worth noting that Moscow reacts extremely painfully to all of Japan's contacts with Ukraine and presses the only lever, the Kuril Islands. Since 2022, the Kremlin has already cancelled visa-free entry there for the Japanese and is turning the archipelago itself into military bases. However, throughout the full-scale invasion and all instances of aid to Ukraine from Japan, this argument of Putin's has never worked once.
Urgent. Budanov publicly stated how he will suppress Putin's influence. Ukraine is entering Africa and taking power away from the Russian Federation. Putin is losing the resource he used to cover the war. The key moment of Kyiv's victory live on air. Budanov, as head of GUR, prepared everything to strike spectacularly now. This is a total shift in the balance of power. The Kremlin's African trump card is burning up. Has the end of influence finally come? First details. Next.
Following the Middle East, Ukraine has set its sights on Africa.
Ukraine is for the first time developing a strategy to expand relations and presence on the African continent. Kirilo Budanov.
The work of Ukrainian special services in the African direction began long before Kyiv's official statements. Back in 2023, fighters of the main intelligence directorate began a successful hunt for Russian war criminals in Sudan.
Mr. Kirilo Oleksiovich, on behalf of the Special Center of the Main Intelligence Directorate of Ukraine, we wish you a happy birthday. Everything will be Ukraine.
Ukrainian specialists helped the Tuaregs destroy Wagner columns in Mali. Russian prisoners in Africa were interrogated by fighters of the main intelligence directorate.
Rank, please. Soldier. Unit of measurement, PMC Wagner. How exactly did you get here to Sudan, actually? Traveled through CAR to Khartoum. What is the goal? To overthrow the local government.
Even at that stage, Kirilo Budanov, as head of GUR, announced Ukrainian specialists will search for and hunt down Russian war criminals anywhere in the world.
Conducting operations by the Ukrainian side on the African continent is first and foremost a blow to the Russian Federation's ability to obtain additional funds into the Russian budget at the time of financing the active phase of combat operations in Ukraine. It is no coincidence that what is happening now on the African continent is a series of so-called military coups during which openly pro-Russian politicians came to power.
In Africa, the Kremlin, first with Wagner forces and then with the African Corps that replaced them, changed regimes and pushed European forces out of the region. In addition to military support for Putin-friendly regimes and control over local resources, millions of Africans fell under the influence of the ROC.
Putin exchanges money for crosses for influence in Africa. The largest expansion of the Russian Orthodox Church in history is a new powerful tool for the Kremlin.
Over the last few years, the ROC has expanded its presence in Africa from 4 to 34 countries. In February 26th, the human rights organization Voco Africa stated that Gundiav, through his African Exarchate, is deceitfully recruiting Kenyans for the war with Ukraine. Due to a lack of money and military resources, Putin has bet on the influence of the church.
According to a Kenyan intelligence report, a total of 1,000 Kenyans were recruited to participate in combat operations on Russia's side. The report details a network of unscrupulous officials who likely conspired with human trafficking syndicates.
Besides fighting Russian influence in Africa, Ukraine is deepening its economic and technological cooperation with countries on the African continent. Wagner Group killers and priests who deceitfully recruit for the war have turned many African countries against the Russian Federation.
And how is Kyiv using this? We are considering opportunities for both military, technical, and economic cooperation with the leading economies of the African continent. Libya, Morocco, and accordingly Algeria. These are the main mineral resources that interest the Ukrainian side. Primarily, it's oil and gas, and consequently, rare earth metals.
Sensation clearing Red Square in Moscow with Ukrainian ballistics. Hundreds of our missiles on a direct course for the Kremlin. This is what we saved the FP9 for. The dictator is digging a new bunker. This is only the beginning. The FP7 kicks off something shocking. A European anti-ballistic shield. Ukraine has done the incredible. Is this victory? You must be the first to see these epic shots.
Ukraine is preparing weapons capable of reaching the very heart of Russia.
Lubyanka simply needs to be wiped off the face of the earth. I like your train of thought. Wipe Lubyanka off the face of the earth. Well, there's a huge number of General Staff, Ministry of Defense, General Staff, Ministry of Defense there, the Moscow refinery. What? Almazante, what else? Some Krunichev, Zvezda Strela, everything. Red Square wouldn't hurt to just, would you mind cleaning up for me? Yes, clean it up.
By the middle of 2026, Ukrainian developers promise to take their own ballistics to a new level.
The first ones should go in just like kids to school.
We're talking about the FP7 and FP9 missiles capable of fundamentally changing the geography of the war. If today the strike range is limited to hundreds of kilometers,
we can do many a day. As many as you order, that's how many we'll produce.
Then in the coming months, the range will increase to 850. And this is enough to threaten not only the border regions, but Moscow itself.
Right now, strikes have already begun that are really showing Russia our capabilities.
Moreover, it's not just about precision strikes, but about potentially massive use. According to the developers, dozens of missiles can be launched simultaneously. 20, 30, and more. In such a case, even modern air defense systems become overwhelmed. Intercepting such a stream of targets becomes a task at the limit of capabilities even for systems like Patriot. To say nothing of the Soviet systems in the Russian Federation.
It's hard for them to intercept such missiles.
Each of these missiles solves its own task on the battlefield, and together they form a new strike architecture. FP7.
The first successful launch, like a confirmed success, was in Taganrog when we, in that hangar, finished off an A-50 that had pulled in there for some refitting.
This ballistic missile is considered a shorter range tool. Its range is up to 300 kilometers, the warhead is up to 250 kilograms, high precision and relatively low cost.
It's like a replacement for ATACMS, a cheap one.
Such a missile allows for the systematic destruction of enemy depots, headquarters and logistics deep behind the front lines. FP9 is already a completely different level. Its range is up to 850 kilometers with a warhead of up to 800 kilograms. And this is effectively a transition to full-scale operational tactical ballistics. We're talking about hitting strategic targets from military facilities to key infrastructure deep inside Russia. Both missiles are launched from the same mobile launcher, similar to the one used for the Flamingo system. This means speed of deployment, stealth, and the ability to quickly change positions, making detection and a counterstrike difficult. Moreover, a European anti-ballistic shield will be created based on the FP7 missile.
We are now planning to create a pan-European anti-ballistic shield based on the FP7 because this missile, this system features a vertical launch, tilts very quickly, is highly maneuverable, and it was originally designed to intercept ballistic targets.
In addition, FPV drones the size of a Flamingo missile will appear in Ukraine, another step toward expanding the range of strike weapons. And while Ukrainian developers are increasing their own capabilities, the Russian Federation has instead brilliantly developed only methods of intimidation. And the well-known Oreshnik ballistic missile turned out to be pointless in modern warfare.
It's a cut-down intercontinental missile. They cut off one stage. An intermediate-range missile designed to carry nuclear warheads. It's unable to carry conventional weapons. Nobody needs that. It's just a waste to show that we can launch it. The Oreshnik, well done. Using such missiles only makes sense for nuclear weapons.
Ukraine proves once again it's not the number of people or kilometers on the map that matters, but the ability to build a system step by step that turns technology into real results on the battlefield. And it seems that in the very near future, the Russian Federation will fully feel the appeal of Ukrainian developments. That's all for now. I'm Darina Hutskalo. More hellish news in our next episode. In the meantime, don't forget to subscribe and like. See you.